Mira Lawson sat cross-legged on the floor of her new apartment, surrounded by half-open boxes and the quiet heaviness of starting over. The city outside her window hummed with distant traffic, but inside it felt hollow, stripped of history and certainty. At 26, she had not expected to be divorced, between jobs, and alone in a place where no one knew her name. Her laptop glowed in front of her, a resume draft waiting for another revision she did not have the energy to give. As a contracts lawyer, she could turn other people's disasters into tidy paragraphs. Her own story refused to cooperate. Every time she reached the part about her previous firm, the memory of her ex-husband whispering into his phone at 2 in the morning surfaced again, sharp as a bruise she kept pressing by accident. Her cell phone rang, slicing the silence. Unknown number. For a moment she considered ignoring it, but habit won. She answered with the neutral tone she used for recruiters. Before she could finish her greeting, a deep male voice crashed into her ear, steady on the surface but frayed underneath. "Lila," he said, "I booked this call because I do not trust myself to see you in person without doing something regrettable. I should have noticed when your late meeting stopped appearing on any actual calendar. Sleeping with my best friend was an innovative escalation." Mira froze. The words struck like brittle glass. No shouting, no theatrics, only controlled devastation wrapped in sarcasm. She recognized the sound. It was the precise tone of someone trying not to unravel. "Sir," she said gently, "I think you dialed the wrong number." Silence. Not empty, but weighted. She heard his breath catch, the faint shift of fabric, the stunned embarrassment radiating through the line. "You are not Lila," he said finally, the admission rough. "No," Mira replied, an involuntary laugh slipping out. "I am Mira. And unless this is the strangest prank of my life, you just opened divorce proceedings with a stranger." A sigh followed, heavy with defeat and something like relief. "I am sorry," he said. "I was driving, rehearsing, not looking at the screen. I must have hit the last digit wrong. I was supposed to call my ex-wife and close what is left of that disaster officially." "It happens," Mira answered, though her heartbeat had kicked into a faster rhythm. There was something disarming about the raw honesty in his voice. "My name is Adrian," he added, dry humor threading back into his tone. "Adrian Whitmore. I owe you an apology and probably hazard pay for emotional exposure." "Well, Adrian," she said, a small, real smile tugging at her lips for the first time all week. "If she cheated with your best friend, she upgraded her stupidity, not her life." The silence that followed was different, curious, steady. Two strangers unexpectedly leaning toward the same crack in their separate walls, the same thin slice of light seeping through. The first call after the wrong number should have felt awkward, but it didn't. At exactly 10 that evening, Mira's phone buzzed with an unfamiliar alert. She stared at the screen for several seconds, wondering if she should let it ring out. Curiosity and something softer, something she refused to name, pushed her thumb to accept. "Hi, Mira. It's Adrian." His voice was calmer now, low and resonant, the kind that settled into a person rather than simply reached them. "I promise this time I dialed intentionally." What began as a polite check-in turned into a conversation that stretched far past midnight. They spoke about small things at first, safe things. Mira's disastrous attempt at assembling her bookshelf, Adrian's ongoing war with a coffee machine in his office. Then the walls shifted. The truth slipped through. Mira found herself describing the collapse of her marriage with a clarity she had not managed even in therapy. How success had made her ex-husband sharper, colder, obsessed with appearances and networking dinners. How she learned betrayal not through a dramatic reveal, but through 1,000 tiny inconsistencies that suddenly aligned too neatly. Adrian listened without interrupting, his breath steady in the pauses, his empathy disarming. When he spoke about Lila, his tone changed. He didn't dramatize or defend. He spoke like a man who had spent months trying to dissect the moment when love had inverted into something unrecognizable. He told her about the night he saw a message pop up on his friend's phone, a message that should never have existed. He could not remember the drive home afterward, only the sensation of something fundamental cracking behind his ribs. Their stories mirrored each other, not in the details, but in the ache they carried like an invisible bruise. The second night, he called at 10 again, and the third. Soon the ritual shaped itself around them. 10 o'clock was no longer a time, but a threshold. The world outside continued its noise, but on that line, they found quiet. Mira learned that Adrian traveled often. Cities blurred together in his schedule, hotel suites and boardrooms indistinguishable except for the art on the walls and the view from the window. He never bragged, but the truth of his life slipped in between sentences. Meetings that involved governments, discussions about mergers worth entire skyscrapers, a schedule that hinted at private jets and assistants coordinating his sleep more than his strategy. She told him about her attempts to regain her footing as a contracts attorney. The interviews that felt like auditions in a language she used to speak fluently. The fear that maybe she had lost her edge. The hope that she hadn't. But the most vulnerable truths came at the edges of those nightly calls, in the moments when neither of them wanted to hang up. "Your voice is the first thing all day that feels steady," Adrian confessed one night, barely above a whisper. Mira felt her pulse shift, her throat tightened. "You make me feel seen," she answered, "and I don't even know what you look like." He exhaled softly at that, a sound she felt more than heard. "Maybe that's why this works," he murmured. "Here, we are only the parts that matter." The line went quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was possibility. The cafe smelled faintly of roasted beans and rain-soaked pavement, a blend that should have felt ordinary, but instead pressed on Mira's senses with sharp anticipation. She arrived 15 minutes early, heart tapping out a steady rhythm beneath her coat. The outdoor heaters glowed with soft amber light, creating pockets of warmth in the early afternoon breeze. Every time the door opened, her breath stalled. She had imagined Adrian dozens of times, not in a romantic way, but in an attempt to protect herself from disappointment. She pictured a man in his mid-40s, perhaps scholarly, someone who wore tweed jackets with elbow patches and collected rare books. Someone who matched the intelligence and stillness she heard in his voice. Someone steady, a little eccentric, a little bruised. When the door chimed again, Mira glanced up casually and froze. The man who stepped inside did not belong to any of her cautious imaginings. Adrian Whitmore carried himself with a startling combination of confidence and restraint. His suit was charcoal, tailored but not flashy, the kind worn by someone who never needed to announce status. His hair was dark and slightly tousled, as if he had run a hand through it moments before walking in. His features were sharper, younger, and far more arresting than she had expected. And his eyes, scanning the cafe with quiet focus, landed on her as though he had always known exactly where she would be. Mira stood abruptly, nearly catching her knee on the table. Adrian's expression shifted from concentration to recognition to something warmer, almost relieved. He crossed the room with long, measured strides, each step anchoring the surreal moment into reality. "Mira," he said softly when he reached her. Hearing her name in that familiar voice, attached to a face that was unexpectedly compelling, sent a flicker through her chest. She managed a breath. "Adrian, hi." For a heartbeat, neither spoke. They simply looked at each other, taking in the reality that had replaced the imagined versions they had crafted in their minds over weeks of conversation. "I have to admit," Adrian said, a quiet smile breaking through the controlled facade, "I pictured someone completely different. My working theory involved glasses, a cardigan, and a stack of color-coded notebooks." Mira huffed out a surprised laugh, her tension loosening. "That is exactly what I was going for this morning," she replied, "but I was out of cardigans. And you," she added, her voice dipping, "I pictured someone older, maybe a professor who knows 80% of the Oxford English Dictionary by heart." Adrian looked genuinely amused. "I can work on the dictionary part if it helps." They sat, and the conversation flowed with surprising ease. The pauses were no longer born of vulnerability, but of fascination. She watched the way Adrian tucked his thumb against the side of his coffee cup when he focused, the way his gaze softened when he listened. He studied her just as intently, as if memorizing details he had only been able to imagine before. When the afternoon light began to fade, he walked her outside. The air held a crisp chill. They paused, standing close but not touching. "I'm not going to kiss you today," Adrian said, voice low and warm. "I want to make sure I don't rush what feels significant." Her pulse fluttered. She nodded, but he leaned in just enough that his breath brushed her temple, a touch softer than a kiss yet more intimate in its restraint. "I'll call you tonight," he murmured. The moment lingered long after he stepped away, leaving Mira standing beneath the dim glow of the cafe lights, wondering if reality had just become more potent than any fantasy she had dared to imagine. Adrian arrived exactly on time, a sleek black car gliding to a stop outside Mira's apartment building. The evening light polished the skyline into silver and rose gold, the city breathing with a soft hum as if preparing for something cinematic. Mira stepped out wearing a simple navy dress, elegant but intentionally understated. She had promised herself she wouldn't let the scale of Adrian's world intimidate her. Still, when she saw him waiting by the car in a crisp midnight suit, she felt her pulse shift. He looked devastatingly put together, like someone who belonged to a realm of negotiations and headlines. Not someone. Adrian, in an effort to impress, pointed out vintages and pairings with a fluency that bordered on corporate theater. His voice remained warm, but his posture tightened, shaped by 1,000 boardroom expectations. She watched him slip back into the armor of CEO Whitmore, a version of him she had not yet met. Polished, controlled, a little distant. While he spoke about mergers and the potential acquisition of a European firm, the waiter at their table tripped slightly while pouring water. It was the tiniest mistake, barely noticeable, but Mira instinctively reached out, steadying the glass before it tipped. The waiter whispered a flustered thank you, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "Are you all right?" Mira asked him with genuine concern. The softness in her voice contrasted sharply with the polished environment. Adrian watched her, something loosening in his expression. The way Mira reacted, naturally, kindly, without even thinking, cut through the performance he had been unconsciously upholding. For a moment, he seemed caught between two worlds, the one he had constructed and the one he wished he belonged to. The first intrusion came moments later. A pair of diners at a nearby table whispered while glancing in their direction, followed by the unmistakable flash of a phone camera. Adrian stiffened. Mira felt her throat tighten. "They recognized you," she whispered. "It's fine," Adrian said, though his jaw ticked in quiet frustration. But his eyes flicked toward her, apologetic. "I didn't mean for tonight to become this." A photographer near the entrance lifted his camera. One flash, then another. The staff intervened immediately, but the damage was done. Mira felt exposed, trapped beneath an unwanted spotlight. Adrian stood and offered his hand. "Come on, we are leaving." He guided her through the discreet exit at the back of the restaurant, down a quiet stairwell that smelled faintly of jasmine and cold concrete. When they reached the street, he exhaled sharply, as if shedding a layer he no longer wished to wear. "Let me try again," he said. "Dinner is not over." "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere without marble floors," he replied. Minutes later they arrived at an amusement park, glowing with warm lights and the scent of caramel and popcorn drifting through the air. The shift in atmosphere was so sudden, it felt like stepping into another universe. Adrian bought them cotton candy. He raced her to the carousel. He laughed, unrestrained, every trace of rooftop formality disappearing. "This is you," she said, breathless after the roller coaster. He looked at her with a softness that made her chest tighten. "This is who I wish I could be more often." When the night deepened and the crowds thinned, he walked her to the park exit. Under the dim glow of a flickering street lamp, they leaned in at the same moment, breath mixing in the cool air. The kiss was soft, imperfect, and achingly real. It was the first moment Mira realized that the man in the suit and the man with cotton candy on his fingers were the same person. And she wasn't sure which version she was falling for more. The days that followed unfolded in a rhythm so steady it felt rehearsed, though nothing about Mira and Adrian resembled a script. They saw each other often, sometimes intentionally, and sometimes because one of them sent a short message like, "Are you awake?" or "I'm near your street," or "Coffee in 10." But neither dared to define what they were building. The air between them hummed with something potent, something undeniable, yet both pretended it was casual, manageable, safe. On paper, it was simple. They were two adults spending time together, but reality had grown far heavier, stitched together by nightly calls and soft glances, by moments that lingered longer than either of them admitted. One evening, they met for a quick lunch near Mira's temporary co-working space. The restaurant was modest, filled with the scent of garlic and warm bread. She had chosen the place deliberately, hoping to ground them after the surreal rooftop experience. Adrian arrived with his sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, the edges of exhaustion visible around his eyes. He sat across from her, studying the menu with an intensity that felt strangely out of place. "Everything okay?" Mira asked. He nodded, but didn't speak immediately. Just a long morning. The silence that followed was not the comfortable kind they shared on the phone. It was strained, awkward, as though both were trying too hard to behave like acquaintances rather than two people who had kissed under a street lamp and shared whispered truths in the dark. Mira cleared her throat. "So, what are your thoughts on their pasta?" Adrian blinked, then laughed quietly in disbelief. "We sound like strangers." She laughed too, but it carried an edge of disappointment she couldn't hide. The barrier between them felt inexplicable, as if their chemistry existed everywhere except here, sitting face to face under fluorescent lights. It made no sense. Mira glanced at her phone, then at Adrian, then back at her phone again. Impulse overtook reason. She dialed his number. His phone buzzed on the table, the screen lighting with her name. Adrian stared at it, then at her, realization dawning. She held it to her ear and said softly, "Why is this easier?" His jaw tightened. "Because on the phone, there are no stakes. I cannot see your expression when I say something stupid. I cannot lose you in real time." Mira swallowed. "And in person?" "In person," he said, voice low, "I am terrified of getting it wrong." Her hand trembled against the phone. "That makes two of us." They sat there, two people separated by a table, but fused through a fragile line of sound, finally acknowledging what they had both been avoiding. "I think we are pretending this is casual, because we do not know how to handle what it actually is," Mira said. Adrian exhaled, slow and meaningful. "I think you are right. I think we have crossed a line without saying it out loud." The call ended, but neither moved. "So," she whispered, "now what?" "Now," he said, choosing his words carefully, "we continue. No label if you are not ready. But no walls either." She nodded. They walked out together moments later, sunlight brushing their shoulders. Neither reached for the other's hand, but the distance between them felt newly defined, not by fear, but by truth. They were not ready to name it, but it was already, unmistakably, love. Adrian had never prepared for a date with such obsessive precision. He triple-checked the reservation at the new French restaurant everyone in the city was talking about. He reviewed the route to ensure no delays. He selected a single deep red rose, convinced that simplicity would make the gesture more meaningful. When he arrived at Myra's apartment, he stood straighter than usual, determined to set a tone of flawless romance. "Tonight, nothing will go wrong," he promised her with a confident smile as she stepped into the hallway, radiant in a soft blue dress that contrasted her warm skin beautifully. But fate had other plans. Barely 5 minutes into the drive, traffic slowed to a crawl. Horns blared in the distance. A cluster of flashing lights appeared ahead. A protest march had surged unexpectedly down one of the major boulevards, blocking the entire route. Adrian looked at the sea of people moving in rhythmic waves across the asphalt and exhaled slowly, knuckles tightening around the steering wheel. "I can turn us around," he murmured, attempting calm. But Mira simply leaned back and listened as he launched into a story about a disastrous business trip to Tokyo, complete with jet lag mishaps and a translator who kept confusing the word acquisition with aquarium. For a moment, they both forgot the frustration. When they finally reached the restaurant, the building's grand facade looked promising, until they approached the door. A handwritten sign was taped beside the handle, the ink slightly smudged from humidity. Closed due to plumbing emergency. Mira pressed her lips together to hide a laugh. Adrian wasn't as graceful. He raked a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a flicker of genuine despair crossing his features. "I confirmed the reservation twice," he muttered. "It's fine," Mira said gently. "Let's go to the gallery instead." But as they stepped back onto the sidewalk, the sky opened with a sudden torrential downpour. The first cold drop hit Mira's shoulder. The next hit Adrian's. Within seconds, they were drenched. Adrian's meticulously planned night dissolved in the rainwater streaming down the pavement. He pulled his suit jacket over Mira's head, but it did little to help. They dashed for the car, only to discover the final blow. The front tire was completely flat. Adrian leaned his forehead against the steering wheel and let out a sound between a groan and a laugh. "This cannot be happening." Mira rested a hand on his shoulder. "This is an adventure." He looked up, rainwater dripping from his eyelashes, and for the first time that night, his frustration cracked open into pure, unrestrained laughter. It was deep, contagious, and wonderfully real. 30 minutes later, they sat in a brightly lit, slightly greasy diner with foggy windows and red vinyl booths. Mira's hair was still damp, her makeup slightly smudged. Adrian's shirt clung to him in wrinkled waves. Yet they were warm, sharing a massive plate of chili cheese fries and laughing until their sides ached. This, Mira thought, watching him brush a drop of water from his cheek, is the real him. Adrian looked at her, eyes soft, completely unguarded. "I thought I needed perfect," he said quietly, "but I need this. I need you. You make chaos feel safe." For a moment, her breath caught. The truth between them was unmistakable, heavy and bright. He walked her to her door later, the rain now a gentle drizzle. Under the dim glow of the hallway light, Adrian's voice grew serious. "Mira, I love you." The words hung in the air like something both beautiful and dangerous, a confession that threatened to change everything. And it did. The next morning, Mira woke with a tightness in her chest that felt like both longing and fear. The memory of Adrian's voice from the night before echoed relentlessly in her mind. "I love you." 3 words she had once begged to hear in her previous life. 3 words that had eventually destroyed her when they were spoken by someone who never meant them. Now they came from a man she cared for deeply, a man who had become the most unexpected part of her new life. And instead of joy, the confession sent her spiraling. Her phone vibrated on the nightstand. Adrian's name lit up the screen. She watched it, frozen. Once, twice, 3 times. Then a stream of text messages filled the display, gentle, hopeful, and increasingly concerned. Mira pressed her palms to her eyes and forced herself to look away. She needed space. She needed to breathe. She needed to make sure she wasn't blindly running into another heartbreak disguised as salvation. She paced her apartment, the walls feeling too close. "This is too fast," she whispered to herself. But the words sounded weak even in the empty room. Because the truth was not about speed, it was about the intensity, the proximity, the possibility of losing something she hadn't even fully held yet. A soft knock startled her. She froze again. Her heartbeat stuttered. She walked slowly to the door and peeked through the peephole. Adrian. But not the composed, confident man she had seen at the diner. He looked undone. Shoulders slumped. Eyes shadowed. Holding nothing but the weight of last night's words. Mira hesitated before finally opening the door. "I know," he said immediately, lifting his hand slightly as though surrendering. "I know I shouldn't have said it like that. I scared you." His voice was quiet, stripped of all the certainty he usually carried. He didn't step inside. He didn't demand anything. He simply stood there, waiting, like a man who understood exactly how fragile the situation was. "I won't apologize for feeling it," he continued, his voice shaking just slightly. "But I will apologize for the timing. For putting pressure on you when you weren't ready." Mira felt the tension in her shoulders ease. Just a little. "I'm not here to fix anything," Adrian said softly. "I'm here because I don't want you to think I'm running away just because you need time. I'm not going anywhere." The sincerity in his voice broke something open inside her, something she had fortified carefully since the divorce. Vulnerability seeped through the cracks. "I was packing," she admitted quietly, glancing at the half-open suitcase on the table. "I was going to leave the city for a few days." "I know," he murmured, eyes flicking briefly toward the suitcase. "And you still can, if you need to. But you don't have to run from me." Mira swallowed hard. She stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in." He entered the apartment with gentle steps, as though afraid to disturb the air around her. They ordered takeout. They sat together in soft, fragile silence. They didn't talk about the confession. They talked about nothing and everything. Work, the weather, their favorite childhood snacks, anything that kept the moment safe. Later, as the night grew deep and quiet, she surprised herself. "Stay," she whispered, "but sleep in the guest room." Adrian nodded, a warm, relieved softness in his eyes. No arguments, no disappointment, just understanding. "The guest room it is, Mira." He pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, a touch so delicate it felt like a promise rather than a claim. "Good night, Mira." She watched him disappear down the hallway and felt something tighten and loosen inside her all at once. The fear hadn't vanished, but neither had the connection, and for the first time since the confession, the silence did not feel like running. It felt like the beginning of something real. Adrian lay in the unfamiliar guest room, staring at the ceiling while the rest of Mira's apartment settled into silence. He had never felt so close to someone and yet so far away. A single wall separated them, but the emotional distance felt immeasurable. He shifted restlessly, unable to quiet the storm inside him. The confession had slipped out like a truth he had held too long, and now he feared that the one woman who mattered more than anything might slip out of his life entirely. He reached for his phone almost without thinking. His thumb hovered over her name for a full 10 seconds before he finally pressed the call icon. The phone rang once, twice, and then Mira answered, her voice soft and immediate, as if she had been waiting. "I know this is ridiculous," Adrian whispered. "I'm 2 rooms away." Mira let out a quiet breath, a small sound full of understanding. Ridiculous, maybe. Honest, absolutely. He swallowed the knot in his throat. "I can't sleep. I keep thinking if I close my eyes, I'll wake up and you'll be gone." The admission cracked his voice, but he didn't pull it back. Mira turned onto her side, the sheets brushing softly against her skin. "I couldn't sleep either," she confessed, and her tone shifted into the intimate whisper they had perfected during nights when they lived only through sound. "It feels like I'm about to confess something terrible." He closed his eyes. "Tell me." There was a long pause, filled only by the sound of their shared breathing. "I have loved you since the first time you laughed at me on the phone, but I know love is heavy, and I know it scares you." Mira didn't respond immediately. Instead, she slipped quietly out of her bed, still holding the phone to her ear. She walked down the hallway, barefoot and hesitant, each step bringing her closer to the man who had unraveled her defenses piece by piece. Adrian heard the faint creak of a floorboard and knew she was near. He opened his eyes just as the door to the guest room softly pushed open. She stood there in the warm light from the hallway, her hair falling in loose waves, her expression vulnerable but resolute. She didn't hang up the call. She kept the phone to her ear as she stepped inside, their voices still passing through technology even though she could now hear him breathing without it. "I need more than a voice, Adrian," she whispered into the phone. His chest tightened. He slowly lowered his own phone and set it on the bedside table. Mira mirrored him. The room fell quiet, no longer filled with the safety net of electronic sound. He reached out and took her hand. He didn't pull her into bed. He didn't rush. He simply held her, his thumb stroking her palm in soft circles. "I'm here, Mira," he said, his voice steady without the filter of distance. No masks, no walls. She climbed into the bed beside him, pulling the covers over them both. They lay close, but not tangled. Not yet. They breathed the same air, shared the same quiet, and let the silence bridge the gap the phone once filled. They didn't speak again. They didn't need to. The presence was enough. The next morning brought a quiet, gentle shift. Neither of them spoke aloud. The boundary between their two lives had softened, and for the first time, Mira didn't feel the instinct to retreat. She brewed 2 cups of coffee, leaving one on the counter for Adrian while he dressed in the guest room. When he stepped out, the sight of the waiting mug made something warm flicker behind his eyes. They shared a silent smile that said more than any words could, a small acknowledgement of what had changed. By mid-afternoon, Adrian made a proposal he had been preparing for days. "Come with me to the office tomorrow. I want you to see my world, not the one I pretend it is, but the real one." Mira hesitated. His world was a place she had never imagined stepping into. Gleaming walls, sharp suits, whispers of billion-dollar deals. But she saw the sincerity in his expression, a quiet plea for her to understand the parts of him he couldn't hide behind phone calls or late-night laughter. "All right," she agreed. The following day, Adrian's car glided into the underground garage of Langford Holdings. The building rose above them like a glass fortress, breathtaking and intimidating. Employees greeted Adrian with polished professionalism bordering on awe. Mira walked beside him, her posture straight, her expression composed, her soft brown eyes scanning everything with quiet curiosity. She didn't cling, she didn't shrink, she simply observed. Inside his corner office, with its sweeping view of the city skyline, Adrian watched her move around the room. She took in the towering shelves of financial journals, the minimalist decor, the subtle hints of a life lived under intense pressure. He braced himself for discomfort, judgment, or the widening distance he feared would grow once she saw the full extent of his power. Instead, Mira stepped to the window and smiled faintly. "The view suits you." She said it not as praise, nor as flattery, but as truth. Later that afternoon, Adrian invited her to a luncheon with 2 of his senior partners. It was a test, though he would never call it that. One partner, a sharp-witted woman named Evelyn, assessed Mira with the calculating precision of someone accustomed to evaluating threats disguised as charm. During the meal, while Adrian discussed a pending acquisition, Evelyn leaned slightly toward Mira with a thin smile. "It must be quite a change for you," she said sweetly. "This environment is not exactly simple." The implication hung heavily, but Mira didn't flinch. "I work in contract law," she replied calmly. "Complexity doesn't scare me. Pretension does." Adrian nearly choked on his water. Evelyn's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing before she turned away. Adrian reached under the table and brushed Mira's hand with his thumb, grounding himself in the reality that she was not intimidated by his world. She challenged it. After the lunch ended and the partners dispersed, he pulled Mira aside near a massive glass window overlooking the city. His voice was low, earnest. "You're not a guest here, Mira. Not someone I'm trying to squeeze into my life. You're the one changing it." Mira looked up at him, her gaze steady. "I'm not afraid of this world, Adrian. I'm afraid you'll think I don't belong in it." He stepped closer, his hand resting gently at her back. "You belong anywhere you choose to stand, and I choose to stand with you." In that moment, she saw the truth his wealth had never revealed. Behind the suits and the empire was a man longing for something real, something human, something uncalculated. And she understood that their worlds had not just collided, they had begun to merge. Mira's birthday arrived with a warmth that surprised even her. She woke to a soft stream of sunlight through her apartment window and a growing anticipation she could not quite name. The past weeks with Adrian had unfolded with an unexpected gentleness, a merging of 2 lives that once felt incompatible. Now they stood at a fragile but undeniable beginning, and Mira sensed he had planned something meaningful. What she did not know was how deeply Adrian had agonized over the perfect gift. For days leading up to her birthday, he wrestled with possibilities. A rare necklace, a luxury trip, an upscale designer piece. All options that any other woman in his past might have swooned over. But he kept hearing Mira's voice in his head, soft but certain. "I don't need extravagance to feel loved. I need meaning." He abandoned the high-end boutiques and spent hours wandering through antique shops and hidden corners of the city, searching for something that spoke not of wealth, but of their story. By late afternoon, he appeared at her apartment door with a nervousness she had never seen on him. He held a small package wrapped in brown paper, imperfect and endearing, so unlike the polished, curated image he often presented to the world. Mira greeted him with a bright smile and a quick kiss, the celebration already feeling intimate and tender. Dinner was simple, homemade, and full of laughter. They talked about childhood birthdays, embarrassing teenage moments, and the unexpected turns that had led them to each other. But through it all, Mira noticed Adrian's fidgeting, his gaze drifting repeatedly toward the small brown package on the table. Finally, she placed her hand over his. "You're making me anxious. What is it?" He inhaled sharply and handed her the gift. "It's not much," he murmured, "but I hope you understand." Mira unwrapped the paper carefully. When she revealed what lay beneath, her breath caught. It was an old-fashioned emerald green rotary phone, heavy, vintage, beautiful. The exact deep, earthy shade of Adrian's eyes. She traced the curvature of the handset, stunned by the symbolism. Adrian shifted nervously. "I found it in an antique shop. It still works." "I wanted you to have something that reminds us where all of this started. When things get loud or overwhelming, you can look at it and remember that the best part of us began with nothing but honesty and a voice on the line." Mira's eyes filled with tears. She stood and wrapped her arms around him, pulling him into a deep, emotional kiss. "The most precious gift you ever gave me wasn't this phone," she whispered against his lips. "It was the courage to love again." He held her close, hands gentle on her back, the moment swelling with a certainty neither could deny. Then Adrian pulled back slightly, eyes shining with purpose. "Mira, I think it's time for our next step. No more half measures, no more separate spaces. I want a week with you. No work, no distractions, no calls, just us." Mira blinked, surprised but not afraid. "A week?" "A remote cabin," he said softly. "No cell service, no internet. Just the truth of whether we work in the quiet as well as we do in chaos." She smiled, her fear replaced by something steadier. The ultimate test. "I accept." They sealed the agreement with a slow, breathtaking. Adrian attempted to cook, but without the familiar rhythm of his bustling city kitchen, he grew impatient. Small quirks that once seemed charming now revealed their edges. He left clothes scattered on the floor without thinking. She reorganized every cupboard she touched. They caught themselves over-explaining simple things, as if filling the silence would ease the tension. It didn't. The tension broke on the third evening. They returned from a long hike that had begun as an adventure and ended as a disaster. Adrian, used to relying on GPS and control, led them down a wrong path that looped them endlessly through the trees. Mira grew anxious as the light faded, though she tried to hide it. By the time they stumbled back to the cabin, soaked from a sudden storm and covered in pine needles, frustration overshadowed every tender feeling. Mira hung her wet jacket with a trembling sigh. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," she said, her voice sharp with exhaustion. "The chaos, the unpredictability. I don't fit into that world of yours where everything is polished and planned." Adrian stared at her stunned. "And I was afraid of this," he admitted. "That the version of me you loved on the phone, the steady one, the funny one, was just a fantasy. That the real me, the flawed man who gets lost in the woods, would disappoint you." The argument escalated quickly, raw and unfiltered. Words they had both held back for months suddenly spilled into the room like a storm breaking open. Mira admitted her fear that his world would swallow her whole. Adrian confessed his terror that she would see him as unworthy once she realized he couldn't control everything. The fight ended with Mira sinking onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands. The silence afterward was suffocating. Minutes passed before she finally looked up, her eyes full of tears. "I can't lose you, Adrian. I can't go back to the gray life I had before you. I love you, and the fear of losing this is bigger than anything." Adrian moved toward her, sinking to his knees in front of the sofa. The relief in his expression was overwhelming. "I love you too, Mira. I've loved you since the wrong number, and I'm never letting you go." He gathered her into his arms, holding her tightly as if anchoring them both against the storm inside and outside. When they finally pulled apart, the room felt different, softer. The weight between them had shifted. The next days unfolded in gentle honesty. They talked for hours by the fireplace, revealing insecurities they had never dared to speak aloud. Without the phone as a shield, they learned to read each other's silences, to sit together without fear. They cooked messy meals, burned half of them, laughed until tears came. They walked through the forest hand in hand, not afraid of getting lost anymore. By the end of the week, the quiet no longer felt like a threat. It felt like home. Returning to the city after the cabin felt strangely surreal. The hum of traffic, the glow of streetlights, and the familiar rhythm of daily life wrapped around them like a warm but bustling embrace. Yet something fundamental had shifted. Their connection no longer depended on the protection of distance or the safety of a voice in the dark. They had faced silence, fear, chaos, and truth, and emerged with a steadier kind of love. Now came the final test, not of survival, but of commitment. Meeting Mira's parents marked the beginning of that final step. The Sunday lunch unfolded in a modest, welcoming home filled with photographs and the scent of home-cooked food. Mira's mother, he spoke not about business, but about the absurdity of the wrong number. The way Mira's laughter had become the anchor he never knew he needed. By dessert, Mira's mother was charmed, Mira was relaxed, and her father motioned for Adrian to join him in the quiet of the living room. Adrian braced himself for questions about wealth or lifestyle. Instead, Mr. Rowan spoke softly, but with a gravity that rooted Adrian to the spot. "My daughter has a good heart," he said. "She built walls after what she went through. I feared she'd never let anyone in again, but you brought her back to herself. Not with money, with your voice. Please promise me you will take care of her heart." The weight of the moment settled over Adrian like a vow already made. "I promise," he said, his voice steady. "She is the best part of my life." After lunch, as he and Mira walked down a quiet tree-lined street, the crisp air held a sense of inevitability. Adrian had been holding a plan close to his chest for days. Not a grand gesture built on spectacle, but a gesture built on memory. He stopped beneath a soft glow of a street lamp and reached into his coat. Mira raised an eyebrow when he pulled out his cell phone. "Seriously?" she teased. "Are we calling for a pizza?" "Not tonight." His voice softened as he dialed her number. Her phone rang in her pocket. She answered with a curious smile. "Hello?" she said, echoing words from a night that seemed both far away and impossibly present. Adrian lifted his own phone to his ear. "Ms. Rowan, I'm calling to tell you something important." His voice carried emotion thick enough to tremble. "For 35 years I thought success meant control, precision, the next big win. But I was wrong. Success is finding the person who sees you even when you are broken. You saw me when I was nothing but a voice on the line." Mira's eyes widened, her breath catching as he pocketed the phone and continued speaking aloud. "You loved the man behind the title. You loved the disaster who dialed the wrong number. And I realized something. All the money, all the power, all the plans mean nothing if I don't have the right person to share the chaos with." He reached into his inner jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. He opened it slowly, revealing an emerald ring, the exact color of the antique phone that began everything. He knelt on one knee, the world narrowing to a single moment. "Mira Rowan, will you marry me? Will you be my right number for the rest of our lives?" Tears filled Mira's eyes instantly. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Adrian, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, the emerald glittering under the streetlight. When they kissed, it was a kiss woven from every late-night call, every fear faced, every truth spoken. Months later, in a small sunlit chapel filled with family and quiet joy, their first anniversary found them in their kitchen, surrounded by flower and smoke alarms, laughing like they had on the night when everything went wrong and everything went right. Just before midnight, Mira walked to the shelf where the emerald rotary phone rested. She lifted the handset and dialed. The landline rang across the room. Adrian answered with a grin. "Hello." "Hello, Mr. Hale," she whispered softly. "1 year later, you are still the most interesting man I have ever met. And thank you for dialing the wrong number." He crossed the room and kissed her, and the connection between them, born from a simple mistake, proved itself once more to be the only one that truly mattered.